delighted to be able to introduce to you Dr. Hubball from the University of British Columbia. Dr. Hubball's research interest as well as practice is in curricular and pedagogical practices, and with that experience is actually developed for UBC faculty a certificate program in teaching and learning and higher education. Suppose it's something like our professional development program, except that we haven't managed to certify it. He's currently co-chair of that program. I looked at his CV and there was a long list of accomplishments which unfortunately time will not allow me to enumerate. But I must mention one other one which intrigues me. Dr. Hubball is the co-chair also of the let's go through this very slowly because it's a foreign language. Co-chair of the universities, masters, veterans, Six aside, I forgot what it is. Six aside World Cup tournament. World Cup tournament symposium. I know nothing about football. Maybe this is the time to learn from you because obviously you're a good teacher, judging by the Teaching Excellence Awards that you have been awarded with. Dr. Hubball is a fellow is a 3M fellowship holder, a very prestigious, coveted national award in Canada. He holds also other awards. Again, I will not please take up your time by mentioning all of them. Let me just mention that he has published considerably on the subjects that we're talking about today, as well as been invited to give talks on the areas of his interest. And this morning he will be talking about curricular, integration of curricular and pedagogical practices, and relating that to scholarship and teaching. I'm sure we'll all have a very interesting morning. So let me now hand you over to
Thank you very much. It's a great thrill to be here. It really is at your lovely campus. And I know we've got two major institutions here represented today. I arrived in late last night and tried to get as much other information as I could and to learn from what's going on campus and some really interesting things. And so I'm looking forward to engaging with you today, sharing some of your practices, your experiences, but also some of the experiences that we've gained from research in many institutions around the world. And these are just some of the different faculties as well as the different countries that I've had the great privilege of working with and assisting through pretty major curriculum reform in many respects, and in other aspects in terms of staff development on various campuses. I guess just following on from what Daphne was talking about as an agenda, that you probably saw the flyer that went out. And there are two key themes that I'm going to be engaging with today as an integration. The first is the widespread attention being given to learning-centred curricula or programme change in higher education and universities. And along with that, the integration of staff development programmes that support faculty and assist faculty in being able to develop curricula, think about their teaching in more innovative and learning-centred ways, and as the Red talks about, to consider teaching and curriculum as a scholarly endeavour, not as something that's full of tricks and different drills and bells and whistles that come along with it, but to be thinking of the curriculum and pedagogy in terms of a scholarly endeavour and the ways in which that entices us to think about programmes more effectively as well as teaching. So those are the two key areas that I'll be looking at today. So what I'd like to do to start off with, please, is as a little bit of an interaction, but also to get a sense. I'd like you to turn to somebody who you're not familiar with or who doesn't work with you. And what I'd like you to do is to share with them, just for about 5 minutes and vice versa, what you see as the status of learning-centred programmes. We'll talk more about what that might mean later in your particular setting. Okay? So somebody who's not working closely with you, but to be able to articulate backwards and forwards about 5 minutes or so, what's the status of the quality of learning-centred programmes in your particular setting? Okay? Give that a go. Thank you. I mean, it's not only a great thrill to see such a lovely and big audience, but also the lively debate right from the get-go. It does get the juices going when we start talking about our programs and what we like and what we don't like about them, and the directions in which they're going. We're going to spend a bit of time unpacking what we actually mean by learning-centred curricula, because there are very different perspectives around these sorts of notions, and it's a hugely complex issue. And this is what makes the scholarship of this area really quite fascinating, because the scholarship of teaching is fascinating, but the level of complexity with curriculum and programs, all of a sudden you've got 30, 40, 50 people who are involved in this. And so along with it comes that different layers of complexity with curriculum. So I'd like you to think about your particular question that you probably arrived today with. Thinking about, that's an interesting title, oh wow, this is timely, or whatever that might be. And I'd like you to think about your question, because I'd like you to try and find the right moment as we go through the different agenda this morning to be able to ask your question, and feel welcome to ask a question at any time. Don't feel like you've got to wait right to the end or whatever. I can play with these quite easily. So as your question feels like that's good timing, feel free to have a look at it. First of all then, let's provide a little bit of context. This is a global issue that we're seeing many factors that are influencing learning-centred curricular change. For example, there are many areas of the world that have now got federal or national initiatives that require institutions and regions to demonstrate student programme level learning outcomes and evidence of student learning throughout the 3 or 4 year degree programmes at their institutions. Just one of those initiatives, I was just in Hong Kong for the last few days and learning about Hong Kong as a region and how the universities are slowly collaborating in the whole region to try and form this group that's working towards learning-centred programs where all of the institutions have got to demonstrate these learning outcomes, albeit in slightly different ways. So it's not just at an institution level or a program level, it's also happening at a national level as well as different regions. Now the example, NSSE, just raise your hand if you're familiar with NSSE. Okay, a few people. Well, here's an example of a policy or an instrument that has spurned the interest in program level change in learning centred curricula. This is the National Survey for the Student Engagement. So what it was about was sort of saying that student engagement is really important. How do we measure that? Well, they came up with an instrument, it's got pluses and minuses, and they wanted to find out the levels of student engagement across the United States, across Canada, and it has been used in other countries as well as an instrument. The idea being that we find out what students feel about their level of engagement, and then that has implications for the program design. How is the program facilitating student engagement? Because active learning is one of the critical indicators for the quality of programming. So something that was a survey instrument has actually had widespread implementation across different regions and institutions to think about learning-centred curriculum. And it has about 5 to 7 different tenets that drive the notion of what is learning-centred or student engagement in this particular context. So that's just one of the benchmarks that's being used in different regions to hold programs more accountable for student learning. And there are many others. We're also seeing on a global scale greater quantities of students coming into higher education and greater diversity. Along with that, dwindling resources, basically having to do more with less. So a lot of institutions are feeling these sort of factors. And of course, most institutions and most people, I'm sure we can all relate to this, we're not here anymore. It feels that most people in the institutions are actually here. And we can't keep on going and going and going. We've just about got our heads slowly above the water. So what this is about is sort of saying, how can we do what we do better, but also smarter? Where the notion that less is more, not just keep adding. So this is an opportunity that we face if it's done really smartly, rather than seeing it as an added burden to do on top of what we already do. So it's kind of interesting there. We're also seeing significant curriculum and pedagogical shifts in universities. And I'll give you one example, prior learning assessment. No longer are the traditional student, if we can use that term, as being 18 years old or 19 years old and coming back to the institutions. We have our learners now who are coming back in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, and even beyond. And not only that, they don't come straight from high school, but we are getting learners who are coming in who've been CEOs, middle managers, and have massive amount of life experience and responsibilities. And it begs the question, should they be starting programs at base 1? Or are there ways that programs can be crafted to recruit such a richness of diversity that come into the universities and capitalise on that richness, but also through prior learning assessment be able to give these students credit for partial way through the journey of the degree programs or the graduate programs that they seek to look for. Particularly in the economic downturn, there's the anticipation that we're likely to get very many more graduate students coming back to universities as well as some of the graduate students. And to what extent are universities and programs responding to these? To what extent are they smartly thinking about the quality of the program and ways to recruit the types of students that they want to recruit, and also to be able to offer the sorts of pedagogy and the learning experiences that will make it a responsive and exciting program? And some universities and some programs, I'm sure that you've got some examples, have done some really innovative and exciting things. There are many others that are still back in about 3 centuries ago, where the notion of teaching and learning is a lecture-based experience. The notion of assessment is a midterm and a final exam, where the notion of getting a degree, whether it be a graduate degree or an undergraduate degree, is the notion of finishing individual courses, but maybe with fresh air to show for it. And we're starting to think about what are ways in which we can think about the scholarship of learning-centred programs, where students have some pretty hard evidence that articulates what it is that they know and what it is that they're able to do in first year, in second year, in third year, and that becomes really exciting for students, but it also makes programs that much more responsive and exciting as well. So we're starting to see a whole range of different things there, and what Peter Yule talks about is triggering opportunities, whether they be internal or external factors, like the wave of retirements of the new faculty that come in, some of the examples. But in terms of programming and curricula, accreditation. Now, some of our programs, as many of you, hands up if you're in a professional school or professional program. Okay, so probably 40 to 50% there. So we will know all too well about the external accreditation that shapes and influences the nature of the programs in our settings. Some of those accreditations can be really positive, some can be really negative, but accreditation is a really important and growing area around institutional funding, around program funding, and a lot of other factors as well. So we're starting to see some of these different areas. I'm painting a very complex and purposefully, not negative, but purposely problematic notion of programming right now. Let me also illustrate this complexity through a fairly simple but two-way hierarchical model, illustrating the idealized connections in learning-centered programs. So the notion that there's a connectivity, first of all, in learning-centered programs. And we can go this way, and we can go that way. So, for example, the broader or provincial contexts are starting to have some influence in policy in how institutions operate. And by sort of saying that there's funding or more funding, or institutions will get funding if the institution can say this is what our students are expected to know and be able to do on completion of their graduate or their undergraduate program. The institution, in turn, we see from a proliferation of various mission statements that imply and are explicit that these are the sorts of things that students are able to learn, whether it be critical thinking skills, problem solving, communications, ethics, etc. And then has a say and an influence at the curricular level, at the program level. So at the BSc level, the BA or the MA, the MA, MSc levels. And then, of course, programs have an influence on the individual courses. The 13-week course that we see quite traditional in any semester programs and through the January through to December yearly academic years. And then, of course, these individual courses developed around learning-centered principles then have implications, if you like, for the street. What's being taught on a Tuesday morning, what's being taught on a Wednesday afternoon, what's being taught on a Friday morning. So this is from the top down, which what we found from our research and practice is probably the worst way. But we're also seeing examples of where the ground up is starting to influence, where the notion of the learning-centred teaching that's happening every day of the week in various settings has an influence on course design and the way courses are being redeveloped and redesigned. And then in turn, the way programs are being constructed. So a much greater link between the program and individual courses, so that the courses start to influence and are shaped by programs as well as programs shaping individual courses. And then of course you can see how programs, this might be the engineering program, the law program, the arts program, the education program, are then being coordinated at the institutional level. And we're starting to see how institutional learning outcomes are starting to align quite nicely with some of the program levels in certain cases. And then of course that connects at that level. So what this attempts to do is illustrate from, instead of these silos being taking place between institutions doing their own things, programs within institutions, almost like their own entity, and then individual course instructors who are teaching courses with very little alignment to how the other courses feed into that course and also how it contributes to the whole program. We're starting to see a much greater alignment, but still an awful long way to go with that as well. So, what I'd like to do at this stage is just pause for a second, and I say I purposely tried to paint the complexity and also problematise the notion of learning-centred programs at this particular stage. What I'd like you to do is, with a different person, and if there's a threesome, that's okay as well, but just for about 5 minutes, and what I'd like you to do is two things. I'm going to have this half of the room going to do one thing, and this half of the room going to do something else. This half of the room, in your twos or threes with a different person, you're going to identify 3 to 5 indicators that illustrate a highly successful program in your setting. In other words, imagine saying this: oh, you know, we've got this program that I'm in, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's fantastic because of this. What would be those indicators that you would say, either in an ideal way or in an actual way, that would make it a really exciting, a really responsive, and a high-quality program? Okay? So looking at 3 to 5 indicators where you've got to sort of try and work, what would they be? How would we articulate that? So that would be from, let's say, from down the middle here. It's only a rough line. So that side of the room, that's what you'll be charged with doing, is thinking about what are the 3 to 5 top indicators that are going to be illustrate this is a highly effective, highly exciting, responsive program. Your side of the room, what I'd like you to do is to think, when we're thinking about learning-centred programming, what do you feel are the implications for staff development? And let me just sort of say this. This is not something where you can say, oh yeah, oh that sounds a good idea. Yeah, we're going to do that. Off we go. And then all of a sudden things are going to be transformed overnight. There's a lot of implications for staff development and thinking about the support that might be needed. So what I'd like your side of the room to be thinking about is 3 to 5 of the top implications for staff development as you see it with learning-centred programming. Okay? And again, I'd like you to do that in 2s or 3s with somebody different than you worked with earlier on. Okay? So we'll have about, let's say, 10 minutes to do that with the partners. Okay? What this cartoon caricatures in a kind of interesting way is often the feeling of our programs in universities. In the elements are there, but we often don't use them effectively. So as you can see there, the tyres are on the top where we've got square wheels. There's some people pushing, some people pulling, but more or less it stumbles along there. So we're trying to get a sense of an exciting program, a responsive program, a high quality program in terms of learning. Now we're just going to hear now from what one of the sides was looking at, what would be their indicators of success for those ones. Was it this side of the room? Didn't we? Okay. So I just want to get a few examples. So maybe somebody from the back. You want to start us off? Which one? What did you have down? Just shout one out. You would mind.
Student awareness.
Okay. So the program would be highly successful if there was a high level of student awareness. Could you just say a little bit more about that? Aware of what?
I think ultimately our goal should be to teach students to be able to teach themselves.
Okay. Thank you. Let's have another one, maybe over here. What did you have as an indicator of success? A highly successful program.
High application number for the course versus enrollment numbers.
Thank you. So high enrollment.
No, high application numbers.
When you say application, because you get a really high level of application numbers, then you can select the highest level of students, and that makes sense. Yeah, thank you. Let's have another one. Maybe at the front. What did you have?
We talked about helping the students make a decision.
Okay, so there's it's a successful program because of the decision making. I'll put development. So higher levels of decision making capacity that is developed in students. Great, thank you. Let's have another one, maybe in the middle. Do you have a different one?
Quality of student performance.
Right. Now just say a little bit about that.
Well, I'm from the conservatory, the music program, so that's what it's all about. It's student performance.
That illustrates. So there's a skills component to that. There might be a knowledge component to that. And there might be a
Artistic awareness from that.
I'll put an attitudinal ability. We'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. That's a bit of a catch-all term there. So yeah, that's a really good one. So high levels of student performance. Again, we can interpret that in different contexts. So for example, in an education setting, that would be interpreted in one way. In a law setting, that would be in a law different way. And so we can start to see some of the implications of that. Thank you. Let's have another one. Maybe around this area. Yes, please.
Progressive student development over time. So across courses, across the entire degree, any one of a number of indicators. So
Yeah.
Enthusiasm, skill level, enthusiasm and interest in the material in particular.
Enthusiasm for learning, self-directed learning, these.
So progression over time, right, over a number of courses.
And that's an interesting one. I'll share with you some that we found is that thinking about outcomes is dangerous when we just think about the end of the product. And like what you're suggesting here is that demonstration of growth and development, maybe at first year, second year, third, depending on how the program might be constructed. Great one, thank you. Let's have another one, somewhere in the middle there. Yes, please.
Student learn and learn to apply.
Student
Learn and learn to apply.
and learn to apply. So the application of learning, not following the degree. High levels of application. High levels of learning. Application. In other words, they've done a degree and they're able to demonstrate that learning in whatever the context might be in there. So this kind of raises interesting implications around evidence of the ability of students.
Yeah, it can be done at the degree level, it can be done at the course level also.
Okay, so during our course.
Yeah. If you teach a course and then you know that you can apply that particular field of interest into the real application,
Yes.
you should be able to do that. It's not that you go to learn some definitions and come out and forget about it. It's just like you learn and learn to apply to solve cases in the engineering industry.
Yeah.
So that's the implication. Learn to apply.
And learn to apply.
Not learn to forget. No. Learn to apply.
Right. Let's have one more. Now, I know your group wasn't doing this, but yes, yeah. Please.
This is all very internal to the university, but the outcome is, students are leaving the university. So I thought the best indicators would be, how useful the program is in their career. So maybe employment figures, is a professional program. That seems to be more ultimate than the rest.
Right. Yeah, there's many.
What about referral? Students who graduated, referring new students into the program.
Yeah. Reputation of the program, referral. No, is it double R? I never know. Or one R?
Two.
Double RQ.
That seems to be the consensus. Okay. Great, okay. Thank you for those. Then you probably think as you're starting to develop some more there. Let me just share with you what we found from our research. And some of these we've already captured. But these tend to be some of the indicators, and I'll share with you some of the research implications of that. But students being able to, the quality of demonstrable learning outcomes, and we've got that around performance, we can interpret that. The clouds or the profile of the program. Now you just think about your setting, it might be different from somebody else's, but for some, that's really important. If through word of mouth, with significant others, this program has got a great reputation, that is success. Different for other people, but that tends to be something that's important to them. Number of graduates completed the program, as well as the enrolment at the high levels of applicants to a program. The quality of graduates in terms of academic, employment, commitment to action outcomes, whatever that might be. Program's ability to attract high-quality students. This is kind of an interesting one that we find. It's quite controversial. And there's been a number of colleagues that have said, you know what, we need to focus our energies on, just as you said it earlier on, we need to get a high level of number of applicants because we need to select the brightest students in our program because we'll have less attrition and we'll have higher student outcomes. Now, other institutions and other people, they completely reject that. They find that completely abhorrent. And they say, no, what about access? And we pride ourselves in our particular program. And it's not that there's a right and wrong. It's different things suit different needs in different circumstances. But we pride our programs on having a wide variety of access. And that's what we showcase as being one of the indicators of success of the program. So a complete reversal in that particular way. And really quite interesting. Cost-benefit analysis. How much is this program costing? How many instructors do we need? How many have we got? What's the ratio of student, instructor, and those sort of, as well as the infrastructure for the program, whether it be resources, equipment, those sorts of things. Pre-post measures, these are kind of interesting, not necessarily on a quantitative, but on a qualitative. And again, it comes back to the growth and development and illustrating and changes. For others, it's about curriculum leadership. A highly successful program will have fantastic curriculum leadership rather than invisible curriculum leadership. And they put that there. And this is one of the interesting issues about curriculum, and I don't know if this resonates with you, but we find in many settings, and certainly in our own, that curriculum, unfortunately, is largely invisible. It's one of those things that sort of, everybody knows, everybody's involved in it, but it's hard to say when, where, how, and why. And what we're seeing in some of the really innovative programs and learning centre programs is that they are now devoting a whole wall very close to the centre of the administration of the program that articulates a visual of the program in terms of the whole, in terms of the outcomes, and in terms of how the individual courses are all connected and aligned to contribute to those outcomes. So it feels like the individual courses have all got a role in working and helping the students develop the knowledge, abilities and skills that they seek to get at the end of the program. So not only some of the indicators that are used, and we had many of these, but here's an interesting way of thinking about it. This is important, and you feel it's a gap in your own setting, that not enough has been done to say what really counts, how do we know if we're successful, and have we got a community around the consensus of those issues. Here's a program that kind of helps to illustrate where priorities might be spent. And they're spent in different ways for different programs. But the ones who spend energies here are programs that sort of say, it's what we've got here about the number of students, applicants. But we need to put our energies more into thinking about how we recruit students in terms of the numbers and the quality. And that's where our scholarship ought to be involved with, because that's going to be the best for us. For others, it's about, you know what, the program is really tired, it needs shaking up, it needs rethinking, and it's the quality of the experience, the teaching and learning experience that goes on in that program. That's where we need to spend our energies. In other words, what is the focus, what is the goals, and how do the courses align and connect with each other, and that's where we're going to spend our focus. Here, programs are starting to say, you know what, we know what the indicators of success are, but we need to spend most of our energies at the end of the program. In other words, what are the students leaving with from our program that is some evidence of success and evidence of learning, whether it be through portfolios and a whole range of other different way. And here, programs are sort of saying, what's really important to us is when the students go out into the field, the leadership they demonstrate, how are we capturing that leadership, and also what are they like in terms of applying their learning a year down the road or 6 months down the road. And not only that, how can we use that information to raise the quality of the program? Now, a number of you are probably sitting there saying, well, all of them are important. But of course, it comes down to priorities in terms of how much energy there is and who's going to be doing this and where the biggest bang for the buck might be in terms of the scholarship we're thinking about learning-centred curriculum. So we're starting to see some examples there of the ways in which the indicators of success can be thinking from a scholarly point of view, where do we want to put our energies and how might we make the connections with our programs in that particular way.
Excuse me.
Yes,
I have a question about the previous slide.
The previous slide, yes.
So you list a whole bunch of qualities that are useful for judging the effectiveness of a program. Is that your research findings?
Yeah, well, we tried to find out the different ways in which programs capture success on the assumption that different programs have different needs and circumstances.
So I guess these are found to be useful, as in if you find this variable is high, it indicates some level of success for the program.
Well, it's a starting point, because one of the things that I haven't talked about at the moment, which is going to come on to, is the importance of learning communities. And it's the learning community that decides what is important. And to get a sense of what's out there is another way of reviewing and critiquing and saying, is this important to us? Maybe not, that's okay, we're okay. So it's really a starting point for that. But then the implications are, once we've got our indicators of success, how is the program contributing to that?
Yeah. Actually, my real question is slow coming. It's whether you find some qualities that have not so much to do with the effectiveness of the program. That would be useful too.
For example,
the research quality of the faculty. Because very often we have the assumption that you guys should come to do something with our department. Why? Because we are the best department doing this in the country, and best usually means best in some kind of research evaluation. So I'm just wondering if that is something that
it comes out in interpretations of this one. So, for example, some would interpret very different than our conversation right now. Others would say that is a high level of indicator of success. It's looking at the research profiles of our faculty. That's going to be something that we would hope, there's the leap, we would hope that translates into the quality of teaching and learning, evidenced by the students' learning. And as we all know too well, sometimes it can be high levels of research activity, faculty and programs can be dead in the water, they can be hopeless. Or they can be done by completely non-faculty, part-time faculty and sessionals who might do a really good job, it's got no relationship with the research activity. That's a discussion for the learning community, and you raise a really good point there. Sure. Thank you. So, let me just go to, from these, among others, these were some of them, you've got articles around some of the research in more detail. But just to give you an idea of the flavour of the research questions we were asking when we were investigating learning-centred curriculum. For example, what are critical factors when institutions or programs, academic units, are developing program-level learning outcomes? So what are the factors in terms of the quality as well as the quantity? And I'll share with you some of the findings that we've got. To what extent are learning outcomes reflected in program-level learning experiences? It's probably no surprise to you, but we were finding an awful lot of explicit program-level learning outcomes with no relationship whatsoever to the actual programs that the students were going through, but very nicely articulated learning outcomes. So there's some interesting things there. And then when and how do the students actually demonstrate the learning outcomes in this program? So we were interested in the application of the learning outcomes and what different ways the students were demonstrating that. And then finally, we're interested in implementation issues, the development, the staff development, and the ways in which programs develop. Because it is a journey, it is a long process, in some cases more painful than others, but we were kind of interested in some of the issues around that. Let me share with you what we, first of all, let's go with this one. These were some of the top popular program level learning outcomes that we were seeing time and time again from institutions of different programs. Students being out, now they might not be on your list and that's okay, but some of them may be. These were the most popular ones out of a series of probably 60 to 80 that we reviewed. But it was interesting, the numbers of learning outcomes. Learning outcomes have had a bad rap probably in the late 80s when we started to see competency-based education that were coming out with 120 outcomes for a program of some sort, which makes it almost impossible to be able to implement with any kind of authenticity. So we're starting to see things where program level outcomes are broad and they're generalised in nature, and also we're starting to see things like 5 to 8 as being the typical numbers that are being expressed through institutions or through programs, whether it be critical thinking and problem solving, responsible use of ethics, those sorts of issues. I'm just going to pause a second and I want you to think about from your program perspective, what's up there that you wouldn't have as your program and what's not up there that you would say, actually for our program, this would be a program level learning outcome that would be really central. It would be one of our top 5. I'll just give you a moment to reflect on that and see, just share with us an example of one that's not there and one that's, that should be there. Anybody like to give a go? What's not there for you? What is there that, yes?
Knowledge of my subject.
Subject, area, discipline, knowledge, yeah. Yes. Yeah. Now, I'll give you different ways that sometimes that's interpreted. For example, now these are being collapsed together, but you could argue to think critically about international law, or to think critically about, for some, not all, but for some people would capture that, because it would be around the thinking critically around the knowledge discipline. But for others, they would say, no, that's not explicit enough. We would need to know, we would have a bullet by its own right. This would be a separate one, and we have a separate one that would articulate mastery of a body of knowledge in our discipline. And then we'd also probably have that one on the tool there, just to give you an idea. But that's a very good one. Thank you. What about something else, something from your place that you say, you know what, we wouldn't have that one, I don't think, that wouldn't work for us, but here's one that we might do. Because there are a few, these are the most popular ones, but there's obviously some on the list that was 8th, 9th, 10th and 11th. But
I have one that might be a bit too explicit,
yeah,
which is a clear distinction between theory and practice and the relationship between the two.
Ah, interesting one. Yeah. We had saw that one. The integration of theory-practice, or theory-practice integration, and those sorts of things. Yeah. Another one, because there's lots. These just tend to be the ones that we see. But, yes, go ahead.
I'm in nursing, we wouldn't never say proficient literacy and numeracy skills. I think they're assumed, in terms of.
But it wouldn't be a top priority. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that articulate design.
Yeah. I'll give you one. Continuing professional development or ongoing learning, lifelong learning. Not necessarily the use of the word lifelong learning, but continually learning, demonstrate continual learning as part of our discipline or part of our whatever that might be. That was one that was nearly not quite one of the very popular ones. Sometimes we see these ones mixed and matched in different ways as well. So what we're starting to see is two things really, one about the quantity and one about quality. Movement away from the competency-based education, where there's loads and loads of mini learning outcomes that you couldn't possibly organise in a large program. But also the types, the qualities of the learning outcomes that are coming out tend to be collapsing more and more. Now, that doesn't mean to say it's a generalist thing, because we're seeing that the interpretation of these might be very different in law, in engineering, in education, in arts, in English, etc., etc. So it really is discipline-specific and context-specific, and that's what gives life to them. The worst case scenario is when there's these generic motherhood type statements that people say, no meaning to it, no relevance. It's when they're actually built by the learning communities and given the relevance, given meaning, and then they're articulated, said, this is us, this is what it really stands for, and this is very different than this one and this one and this program and this program. But nevertheless, there's some kind of consensus there. And what we start to see is from an institutional point of view, there's a larger consensus across faculties as to what really counts in that regard. Let me share with you one more thing that we found. The other thing that we found from our research around the qualities or the ingredients of learning curricula, and again you can use this as a baseline with your own programs. We're starting to see things like what we call diverse pedagogies. So a move away from the lecture format, midterm and final exam, towards innovative pedagogies, things like distributed learning experiences, more collaborative student work and collaborative assessments, so innovative assessments, authentic assessments. We're seeing opportunities for student presentations and poster displays in the classroom, again away from the traditional lecture, midterm, final exam. Community or course-based projects, case-based learning, team-based learning initiatives, student graduation portfolios. I'll talk more about these later on. And we're starting to see a range of different assessments, but not only just the mini quizzes and the essays. And nobody's saying that they're out. There's a place for them, but it's as part of a much greater, broader picture. Capstone projects. Is anybody not familiar with the Capstone project? Okay. Capstone project is, in an undergraduate program, is like a mini thesis or a mini dissertation, where the students would actually engage in research skills, maybe in a team, and they'd identify a problem, research that problem, and be able to present it and write it up. So it's like a mini dissertation. And we're seeing some programs that use that as part of first year, second year, third year, and fourth year, as building the students up to a greater research emphasis and research productivity at the end of their program. And a wide range of assessment methods, from self-assessment to peer assessment, group assessment, instructor assessment, and external review in some cases. And again, a movement away from the traditional pedagogies as we did originally conceive.
I did not quite understand in what way innovative learning strategies would be necessary. Why do you bring them in the picture now?
Because what this is sort of saying, what we're doing now is we're unpacking learning-centered curricula in its different ways. What does that actually mean in practice? Well, one of the things that it doesn't mean that the mode of pedagogy is lecture only for all of the course and for all of the different courses in that program. And so lecture would be one of many pedagogies, and these were the ranges of different pedagogies that we were starting to find in learning-centered curricula from best practices and those sorts of things. So it was just the modes of delivery that were. Let me put that into some kind of a context for you, because I think that this might help with your point just there. Here's from one of the articles that you've got on the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Sciences. Now you can put the discipline aside because you can see the notion. This is a 4-year program that was completely redesigned. It was redesigned from a smattering of courses that were lecture-based, had midterm and final exams. And the students just went from course to course to course to course, right the way up, and then they finished their degree. Wasn't much alignment between the courses, and certainly wasn't demonstrable progressions from first year to second year to third year to fourth year. What they did was they redesigned their program around 8 ability-based outcomes. Now this would be a work in progress. They'd be the first to say that that's probably going to shift to 6 in the end. But they had 8 program-level learning outcomes that drove this curriculum. And this is the nature of the curriculum. And what they had was, first of all, they had some prerequisite courses in arts and sciences that the students needed to do. But what they chose was a course that they called CAPS in first, second, third, and fourth year, which was an integrated course. Now, like most programs, there are sub-disciplines within the program. So it's rarely just one particular stream, but the students are actually subject to lots of different streams. The nature of the CAPS courses were that there was instructors who were charged with integrating 5 different sub-disciplines within that program. So this stopped the idea of the silos approach. And so the students experienced this in first year, second year, third year, and fourth year. These CAPS courses were driven by the ability-based outcomes. So the instructor sort of said, okay, all 8 outcomes are going to be addressed in these courses as well. The next thing they had were these field experiences, which are in blue. And they said, right, the students are going to go out into the field in second year, third year, and fourth year. And those field experiences are going to be driven by the 8 program-level learning outcomes. In other words, they've got to demonstrate how they've achieved critical thinking, problem solving, and all the other different ones that they had through the field trip experience, which was really quite innovative in that way. And then finally, they had a capstone project in fourth year where the students had to integrate all of the different program level learning outcomes. Now, here was the question they wanted to address. We've got these program level learning outcomes. How do we know that they're being done in practice? And what they didn't want is for every single course to feel that they've got to do every single one of the 8 outcomes. What they chose to do was to map out a curriculum model that said we're accountable by these program level outcomes because the students are getting all 8 in the CAPS courses, they're getting all 8 in the clerkships, and they're also getting all 8 in the capstone project. And the individual courses that they do, as well as this, the faculty have to choose 3 of the 8 outcomes. So there was that kind of buy-in as well. So no matter what course I was teaching, I had to choose any 3 outcomes out of the 8. And then they could answer the question, at the end of the program, our students can do this, 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 and this of the 8 outcomes, and this is how we know. This is our accountability measure. As opposed to just saying, like, every course do all of them because there was no confidence in that, and neither was it necessary in that regard. So this is a useful model of sort of bringing the program level learning outcomes into practice with the program. Now, as you can see, the discussions that we've had, and also your discussions earlier on, is that learning centred curriculum is quite a complex process, and it needs to be considered as a scholarly process for us to progress. And one of the things that we need to think about are the implications for staff development. So given the complexities of learning centred education and some of the implications, how do we think about staff development in ways that can help support faculty and assistants? And that's what we're going to take a look at now. So this side of the room was thinking about the staff development implications and some of the indicators we have there. So, who'd like to start us off? What one of the ones you had on your list?
I have a caveat actually.
Yes, please.
Staff development alone doesn't change all these things. I think there's a misconception that staff development units are solely responsible for providing X number of hours, X number of programs, and automatically staff members will be reprogrammed to do learner-centered curriculum design.
So you're advocating
that it's a joint partnership between the staff development programs and buy-in from senior leadership. In terms of the whole program design at the institutional level, there has to be some kind of alignment between the two.
And maybe also academic units.
Yeah, rather than just assume that staff development unit is going to be the catalyst, the panacea to convert everyone from instructor-led curriculum to a learner-centered.
And that's a very good point. That's certainly one of the things that we found is and I put this, it's quite controversial as you can see, it's moving away from thinking that the responsibility is somewhere else, but that it's a shared responsibility within the learning community, the institution, the centres as well as the ones that are there. That's a very good one, thank you. Somebody else, staff development implications, moving towards learning-centred curriculum.
I think mentorship is very important.
Mentorship, yeah, thank you.
There should be people who are very much who believe in scholarship in education, and they mentor new staff so that everybody feels vested in education, not just research.
Yes. Great one, thank you. One at the back there. What did you have on your list? Your discussions.
We are talking about the impact on students' feedback. The way we do the student feedback might be different. We are talking about if we move away from teacher-centered curricula to learning-centered curricula, the student might feel that the lecturer might not give them enough material or enough support. So the feedback of the student has to be redesigned so that they understand that the curricula is learner-centered.
Thank you. So the utilisation of student feedback, but also the education around the processes. And I think one of the terms that's often used as well, that you may be familiar with, is formative processing. And the idea being, and I think it ties in nicely with what you're talking about, is that programs are a dynamic life. And the more we consider feedback from students as well as peers ongoing throughout that formative process, then the more likely we are that the outcomes will be that much more authentic at the end, rather than thinking that it's just something that happens at the end in terms of feedback there. Thank you, that was good. What about somebody else? Anybody? Implications for
Can we talk about the imposition of change and how that impacts on what the academic believes and the way that they see how teaching and learning should be, and how you bring people along, I suppose, to manage.
That is a really interesting one. I mean, something that's maybe implicit in this is the notion of tenure and promotion, the reward structures. What are ways in which that's been encouraged and facilitated? And I'll give you a parallel in student learning. You sometimes hear many people say, I wish the students would really participate more and engage more in my courses. And then I sort of say, can you show me your course outline for me? And I look at the course outline and I look at the way the students are evaluated, lo and behold, they're evaluated through the midterm and final exam. So there's one thing that's required, and yet there's one thing that's idealised. And that's no different with faculty. If we want faculty to engage in learning-centred curricula and high-quality learning-centred programmes, then we've got to think of what is the reward structures and the incentives that's there to entice and support that. Not something that's being done on the side of the desk because these things count, which don't really align with with these others. I'm not sure if that was the direction you were heading, but some of those might be there. I'm trying to reinforce that one as well. Something else? Yes.
I think there's a gap between if you are able to define what are the learning outcomes, but then you bring this to the staff and ask the staff, okay, this is a learning outcome. But staff often don't know how to design the course or change the course such that they get to that end point. So the implication is we need to train staff to take the learning outcomes and design a course that will achieve those learning outcomes.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm going to talk about in a second, is this leadership opportunity. And along with that, learning communities. And that doesn't mean to say that everybody has the same level of responsibility and expectation within an academic unit around the scholarship of programming. Because there might be curriculum leaders, curriculum teams, and people at various levels, as you rightly say. But there's opportunities there for people to be able to contribute more where they can and to show that level of leadership, and for others to be guided and facilitated. I think one of the worst things is when everybody in a unit feels very, very threatened by learning-centred programs. It feels like a massive change, and there isn't the structure in place to facilitate a learning community through various levels of responsibility and contribution that people have. Well, that's a good start. Let me share with you a program that we have at UBC. It's part of the resources that are here, and there's one of the things. We call it the SoTL Leadership Program. And this is for people, particularly like yourselves, who are keen about teaching and learning, keen about programming and about effective programming, and are interested more in the scholarship of what we call curriculum and pedagogical practice. And it's the idea that faculty, whether they be mid-term faculty or mid-career faculty or whatever, educational developers, are interested in studying their program, using their program as the starting point, and being able to get a sense of the different literature and different support structures that are around building and developing those experiences. And I'll just share with you, I've got this here. The first thing that we found was that in terms of thinking about staff development is that learning-centred programming is a process of change, and it doesn't just go from nothing to full on or all of a sudden it's going to happen overnight. And what you'll see in one of the articles is this notion that there are various stages of learning-centred curriculum change. And you might be able to identify your own program. Think about your own program as I call out the definitions. This is where learning-centred programs are not even on the radar, not even talked about in the unit, hoping that it's somewhere else it's going to go away. That's adaptive. curricular stage. And then at the awareness stage, this is programs that are aware that there might be groundswell of change, that there might be movements towards learning-centered teaching or thinking about evidence of student learning in programs, but not a lot is actually happening at this stage. In fact, whether that's it. In the initiative stage, this is where, whether it be from the ground up or from the top down, people have recognised that this is something that we ought to get on board with. There's some really good examples going on. We want a piece of it, and we want to send people out to do fact-finding mission to get a sense of what's out there. And starting to develop leadership, people in leadership roles starting to, like yourselves, trying to get information about what else is going on out there. In the mobilisation stage, this takes this to another level, where there's starting to be working groups working on different aspects of course design, or working on assessments, or working on different aspects of indicators of successful programs. And then in the action stage, which is really a later stage, is where you start to see well-articulated learning-centred programs. Program-level learning outcomes, diverse pedagogies, assessment is being addressed, and it's an ongoing development around a clear set of notions and goals around the learning-centred program itself. And then in the practice stage, this is where more and more data is being collected on the quality and the effectiveness of that program. So they're getting data on what level of students are applying to get into the program. What is the qualities of the teaching and learning? How are the courses aligned with each other? And what are the sort of outcomes and evidence that we're getting from students? And this is very much an iterative process. It's not a linear one at all. So you can go backwards and forwards as this kind of diagram takes place. Now the implications of this are that in terms of staff development, is that different staff development initiatives would be worthwhile at different stages. And this was something else that sort of came out, I think, from there, is that it's not a case of going straight into this stage and thinking that's going to work for everybody, but neither is it thinking that everybody in the unit or the program is at this particular stage. So the articles give a series of intervention strategies and staff development implications for different stages of learning-centred change. What we also found in terms of staff development, again, which sort of corroborates with this, is that there's actually a whole range of support mechanisms, and again, think about this from your own setting, that are really important to support learning-centred curriculum change. The tenure and promotion process. To what extent do you have curriculum leadership awards in your unit? Just put up a show of hands if you've got curriculum leadership awards in your academic unit. Few, maybe one or two, so very little. Now you can see the signal that this sends vis-a-vis the research culture and the types of rewards and things that are there. Can you imagine if there was an innovative course design award, not teaching and learning, but innovative course design in your unit, and the signal that would send in terms of, wow, that's a smart thing to do. It's awarded by the head, it's awarded by the dean, or whatever that might be. So these are some of the other ones there. Teaching Excellence Awards around the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And this, which I'm going to highlight in a second, is the Faculty Certificate Programme, which is for educational developers and people who are interested in the qualities of their programme. And things like a curricular development and pedagogy support service on campus that goes and is able to help groups and academic units in working with staff development and these other things. So now we get to this particular certificate program. The portfolio is over there. It began in 1998, and its focus is on the scholarship of teaching and learning, be it in curricula, be it in course design, or be it in teaching and learning experiences in university. It's an 8-month mixed mode program. In other words, people do it through video conference, through WebCT, as well as meeting once a month for 8 months. And then as part of that journey, they develop a portfolio that's got 8 different assignments in that they use to demonstrate their abilities around the scholarship of curriculum and pedagogy. And we've had tenure, teaching award winners, over 200 faculty members now who have graduated from this very small leadership program. More importantly, the work that they've produced in their own units around investigating curricula and also supporting staff development in different ways has been really quite incredible. We're very proud of that. It's reinforced, I'll just come to a second, it's reinforced by the notion that the university president awards the certificates at the end of the year in a really big ceremony at faculty graduation. And again, if you think of the signal that sends, there's only 20 odd people who graduate, and probably anywhere between 30 to 40% are international faculty members from different institutions. And then the president of the university awards this in a ceremony is a really big factor of the successful nature to reinforce quality teaching and learning in the institution. The other thing I should mention, just before I come to you, is that about 5 years ago, in tenure and promotion, they actually had guidelines for the scholarship of teaching and learning. And this was quite revolutionary because what it did, it offered a track for faculty members to see how their work around curriculum and pedagogy could be rewarded and valued at the institutional level to the point where they were getting tenure and promotion as a result of this. So these were policy guidelines in the tenure and promotion process to support people in these types of activities. Sorry, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering the 200 graduates for this certificate program.
Yeah.
Do you see a difference in the staff coming from different faculties? Do you get more faculties from the arts or science or medicine?
That's a great question.
And also another question is, do you see an increased trend of participation or an increased trend of participation?
Yeah, we try to walk the walk and talk the talk with this program for tenure, so it's changed and it's moved, and all the time we've been sensitive to these sorts of things. We get more applicants than there are spots every single year. We only take 20 odd people. We've got 12 faculties on our campus. It's a research-intensive university, and so every dean can only put 2 people forward. Now, that's a big faculty. And depending if we've got a high international cohort that particular year, they only get 1 slot, 1 person. So to answer your first question, we always get a diversity in the cohort because we've got 1 from every faculty or sometimes 2 from every faculty. Secondly, we've always got more people who want to come into the program than we've got players, and that keeps the edge and the quality of the program. But it also sends a signal about the learning community. We see the learning community as the institution and beyond, and not. I mean, we would feel it easily with medicine people. Year after year after year, they always put 8, 9, 10 people forward who are really, really strong applicants. And we just sort of say that's what we've done.
So do you give the chance to the best applicant or
best applicant? So they have to apply, they submit an online application, and they have to have a recommendation and endorsement from their dean, who has to write a short letter as to what their contribution is and why they would make a great candidate. We look at the 3 things. We look at why they feel, what they hope to get out of the program, why they feel they're an ideal candidate, and what they've done to date that demonstrates their ongoing commitment to curriculum and teaching at the university. So those are the 3 things that we look at as part of their individual application when we look at the quality of the dean's letter. Because what we want, and it goes down to this, what we want are really strong, committed people who will, walk through a burning building to do this because they really want to do it. Because we know that when they go back to their unis, they're going to be movers and shakers and going to do some great stuff with their students, great stuff with their faculty, and that's only going to help reinforce the cycle there. So we're really careful at the start. We've only got a small budget as well, so now, coming back to the other discussion about the access, we have a Centre for Teaching and Learning on campus that offers a wide range of other types of services. So this is one of a few. So we're not, other people have got other opportunities to do staff development, but this is really a leadership program for people in international and across Canada as well as at university.
So how do you address the issue of staff development for all the staff, for all of the staff? Because somehow, especially British Columbia or US research university, the staff, every staff has been in awe in the job. You just change the way you describe what you are doing to pretend you're making more campaigns. It's true. What I think most of us think. So how do you reach everyone in a non-artificial way?
Right. Well, it's a really good question. It comes back to this thing of not expecting or thinking that all people should do the same thing. So if I can come back to this diagram, if they're not, you can use any diagram, so forgive what I've done. If you can imagine that you've got some people who are here, you've got some people who are there, and you've got some people who are in this, and some people who are in really simplifying things here. But this is what would be, that should be considered for everybody. So every faculty member on our campus should be thinking that teaching is a value, teaching is a scholarly process, and they should be thinking and reflecting on their practice. Now, this is what we would expect all faculty members to do.
Sorry, but by scholarly, I'm not clear on what you mean.
By
You mean that they are just, thinking about what they are doing and trying to organize it?
Yeah.
Or do you mean that it is a science and they are truths?
That's a great question. There are two aspects of the scholarship of teaching and learning which are often confusing. One are scholarly approaches, and one is the scholarship part. Then a scholarship part would be in the traditional sense of formal peer-reviewed publications or conference presentations. Clearly, that's not the signal that we want to send to everybody. There are only a very few people in each unit that we want would probably be involved in that. But we want everybody to be thinking of teaching as a scholarly process, and that is reflecting on our practice, getting feedback, as informal as it might be, and thinking, how's next week going to be better than last week, and how is this working towards high quality learning? Now that's a culture of scholarly approaches. We want every faculty member to be thinking that, so that they realise there's a body of literature out there, there's good practices, there's support mechanisms, and they have a responsibility to think about teaching as a scholarly thing rather than walk into their lecture podium, 50 overheads that they used 3 years ago, boom, 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 test and midterm will be in 3 months' time, and off they go, in a simplified way. So we would want them to be thinking as a culture of that, and the question comes, how do you reach these folks? Well, the SoTL program that I've just talked about is right up there. Now, there's only a very few people, but we're trying to pick out the people who are the movers and shakers and have got influence and support and time to be able to work with people locally in their units. So they are going to be charged with responsibility of largely doing this. They're going to be creating that. Now, in addition to that, we have a centre on campus who offers seminars and workshops and these sorts of things. So in addition to the leaders locally, as well as the culture institutionally, these folks are trying to get that culture going in that way. Now, I won't even sort of tell that to you, but these people are where this particular program focuses on. It's a very small number. And we feel that by investing in these folks, they've got a massive contribution to make. Way more than sending, I think as somebody said, it's not a case of the responsibility of the centre to deal with the whole institution, but it's thinking about strategic approaches that enable a learning community as a whole.
I guess my point was that in a research university, we were discussing that before. Most of the academics have the feeling that this pyramid should be very flat. And then as soon as you start, meeting a group of people, then it's just like, this is very artificial. Where everybody is at the same level.
Well, they're not. That's the problem. This is the problem. I'm not saying I like this diagram. This is my easy, quick thing. But when we assume that programs are like that, then that's really problematic, because we've got different levels of expertise, different levels of commitments, different levels of interest. And when we have faculty members who are not here today, obviously, whose research discipline is everything to them and they're star players, there's a place for them. But then we need people with support and resources where teaching and learning, just like everybody in this room, is important, who are going to come to things like this on a Friday morning when we do writing and all the rest of it, who are going to be taking responsibility and taking a greater sense of care with the quality of the programme, reflecting on the programme and how can we build this programme as an ongoing endeavour, rather than thinking that everybody's flat so nobody moves and becomes largely invisible. So I'm not saying I like this particular, I take your point, but it's highly problematic when we think that everybody's equal and everybody's equally committed to the programme, because we know they're not. We've got this in our midst, and what we try to do is use the expertise of everybody at different levels to make that contribution. That's a very good point you raised. Yes, please.
Just one thing that I'm not sure if I understood the gentleman correctly. When you were talking about scholarship and scholarly learning, I think what he was saying is a very important point, because the way you pointed out, people need to research to maintain the level of intellectualism in a department, etc.
Yes.
And scholarly learning comes about in translating that into a learning grasping ability. So we translate that to the students.
Yes.
We know what we research, etc. Now, I come from the faculty abroad, and we see how practice works and how research works. I think that the marrying of the two thoughts is very, very important. Because if you have people who are teaching but not researching, you have a very one-dimensional view of how you are able to translate to students what students need to grasp.
Yes.
The students need to grasp two things. They need to grasp substantive issues, and they need to grasp learning methodology, so they're able to equip themselves.
Right.
Now, if a person who's out there teaching scholarly practice but they're not researching, their substantive law, I think, is taking a bit of a knock because they're not equipping themselves intellectually. So their theory of knowledge is going to be lacking. So they're translating a one-dimensional view to the student. So the issue there, what was raised about research, etc., I think it's very important. So the person who's teaching the program need to be two-dimensional. They need to be researchers, and they need to know how to translate that so that students are able to learn.
I would agree with that, and I would say that applies to full-on researchers as well.
Yes.
That they need to be able to apply their craft, inspire students, excite students to their program, and not be thinking, I'm looking at my watch and I can't wait to get out of there because I'm going to work on this grounds and I don't care about the students and that kind of thing. So the responsibility is a shared thing, but what I would argue is that people come into a team or a learning community with different strengths, and the thought of turning a full-on researcher into being committed to the program, well, we know from years and years and decades and centuries that's going to be whistling in the wind. But at the same time, I agree with you that we don't want to think that the programs are just around people who are teaching and not doing research. It's everybody's involved, but they're involved in different levels. But the people who are involved in the teaching more have got more of an emphasis on that. I would argue that that is research, because if they are researching their programs, researching the law program, and saying what data are we using, what are our questions that we're raising, and how is this being used to enhance the quality of the law program by drawing upon the expertise, and then how are we using a leadership position to be able to disseminate that to my peers, as well as publish in a peer-reviewed journal, as well as take a leadership role with the centre and offer seminars and things. I would argue that that's a research endeavour as well, because it's peer-reviewed and it has all the elements of research to it, but albeit in a slightly different way. So I think you pointed out, I am trying to steer clear of all of the dichotomy there, for sure. Other questions about your own setting, challenges, comments, thoughts?
Isn't this all about turning people into good teachers to motivate the students to learn and to make it easy for them to learn?
It is about, it's a focus on learning. So it's about quality of learning. And what it is trying to make programs better vehicles for student learning. Because what we're finding time and time again is that programs are conceived in terms of boxes with individual courses that don't necessarily align, and the students feel that they're hooked in the first year, second year, third year, fourth year, and then they get the piece of paper with sometimes very little to show for it, but for share. And so, I mean, for example, in my own experience, I don't know if this is the same as yours, but I did an undergraduate degree and I actually loved it. It was a fantastic degree, absolutely fantastic. Thoroughly enjoyed it, was really excited by it. But I was worried to death that anybody said to me at the end, so you're a sports scientist now, are you? So what do you know? What can you do? Wow, I've just done 3 years on a sports science degree that I thought was really very good. But ask me what I knew, ask me what I could do. I know I wasn't allowed, but I had no idea. I thought, well, I did this, well, no, I did it. So, but what a learning centred program strives to get at is sort of saying, throughout the years of the program, there's going to be tangible evidence. Now, of course, we submitted papers and all the rest of it, but there'll be tangible evidence in a coordinated and a cohesive way that by the end of that program, I'd walk out with a portfolio and say, this is me, this is my degree, and this is what I know, and this is what I'm able to do. Here's a sample of my writing, here's a sample of my leadership, here's a sample of my presentations, here's a sample of the knowledge structures that I've developed in the particular subject. That's quite exciting for me as a student because I've got something to show for it. But not only that, from a program point of view, it's got a lot of data there to sort of say, how do we make the program better, and is the program moving in the directions and the indicators of success that we want it to? And all too frequently, learning communities aren't coming around programs. They're not asking the questions that they really want to ask about. Is our program successful? To what extent are we successful? And how will we make it more successful, and those sorts of things. So, long-winded answer really, but the essence of it is making programs more learning-centred, and therefore the teaching to respond to that, to make it more learning-centred.
I would like to amplify your point a bit. When you're asked what you learned from your program, if you can't say it in a few sentences that other people can understand, that reveals. But you could probably tell people what exactly you do in your exams.
Yes.
But that.
Yes. Yeah, that would be a nice part of the students to be able to articulate the discovery and the journey of the program, for sure. Yes, please.
My simple question is how long that stages of curricular reform takes, but I think the larger question is about the challenge of doing things like this in an environment where changes come very often, and it could be top-down changes such as how many modular credit requirements you have to meet, it changes from year to year. Yes. And for me as a Department of Social Work in the Faculty of Arts and Social Science, for example, there could be changes in terms of what kind of major students take. Do they take single major, double major, do they do joint programs with other faculties? And so all the requirements change, and you need to then relook at your curriculum each time.
Yes. Well, great questions. The first part is like, how long is a piece of string? But what we're seeing is that for the faculties that we work with that have really gone through accreditation and said, you will go out of business unless you respond. So they had a massive incentive to move and radically redesign their programs. It can take, 18 months to 3 years until you're starting to see the different stages that they go through. It all hinges on the quality of curriculum leadership that we find. But the single biggest factor, where there's somebody or a group of people that are taking responsibility for the curriculum, who have the political clout in their unit to move and shape people, to make people excited and interested in the program, they're able to, and who are supported, they're able to move things along a lot quicker. Where you've got a curriculum committee or curriculum leadership that don't have the political clout. In other words, people have been given this responsibility. There might be junior faculty, there might be people who haven't got the political clout. Then people can, turn the other way and be working on other things, and it goes on forever and ever. And also, it can create a lot of fatigue, and people get fed up. And where you don't get strong curriculum committees and strong curriculum leadership, people can be overwhelmed by exactly the things that you said. Now there's this modular, and how many credits there are, and this changes and that changes. That shouldn't be communicated to everybody in the academic union. That should be the domain of strong, good quality curriculum leadership who can make sense of the moving that goes on, because that's inevitable. It's not a static endeavour, it's a moving. But at the same time, they can just let people know and help work with people to what they need to know to be able to make the modifications and the adaptations. So I can't say enough about the successful curriculum change efforts that have been done in units where there's been strong curriculum leadership with a lot of political clout, and there's been really high levels of curriculum committees that have been engaged in that process. They also need supporting. And they seem to be the hallmarks of massive things that can happen or really small things that can happen. Very often, curriculum committees have been restruck through learning-centred programs, because what they found is we need a new lot of thinking. We've got a curriculum committee that's working on the existing program, but the dean or the senior administrator has actually selected people who are well known for their abilities to mobilise others and have a strong commitment and passion towards the curriculum. And that seems to... When I've worked with deans, and they said, who's going to get to do this? And I said, who are your best people? And they said, well, there's this one, and this one, but I'm not sure if they would do it. And I said, well, what can you offer that would make it worthwhile for them to do that? And so they thought about whether it be the course release, whether it be the sorts of funding that they can offer, and the sorts of support they can offer to get these processes underway. Me personally, I don't think we can dabble in learning-centred curricula. I don't think it's something that we can do on the side of the desk. I don't think it's a sort of expectation that rank and file faculty will engage and embrace wholeheartedly. It needs to be done in really smart, cohesive and coordinated ways of capitalising on the really strong expertise that some faculty have and commitments they have, like the people in this room, as an example. But only if it's worthwhile. The exciting part, though, is that what we've found, we give you another option on this, is that faculty members have been excited by the notion that this is a scholarly endeavour, and actually they're at a stage of their career where they can invest in this, but also see opportunities for collaborative papers, collaborative conference presentations, and to be given the status around programs as they have in the discipline, or colleagues have within the discipline of the program. And that's been quite an exciting endeavour, and people have been more interested in the methodology of action research and methodology of scholarship, teaching and learning, so that they really are not just seen as a practitioner, which doesn't help anybody, it's not the right thing, but they're seen as a practitioner researcher in these areas. And I think myself and many colleagues, and probably like many of you, that's got its appeal, because we know that we'd be sidelined and put out to dry if people in our colleagues saw us as just practitioners of our programs. And we need to be seen as researchers and scholars in that particular way. Yes?
I think many of us have come from an era where we have not experienced what is learning-centered curriculum. I mean, we went to school and there's a teacher giving us information and we learn that way. But now, if the paradigm is shifting to creating learning-centered curriculum, what are some of these tools or skills that you can help us, to get this started? Because we've never experienced it before.
Well, I take your point. I think there's many best practices around the room, as an example, and also within the academic units, where there are elements and there are evidence of best practices, and that's the best place to start with, because it would be quite wrong to consider learning-centred programming as completely brand new, as something that's not going on. I mean, you wouldn't be here unless you was interested, as an example, at some of the things that you've done. And what you find is, though, the innovative ways in which you teach, the things that work in your classroom, they fit nicely within the paradigm of learning-centred programming. It's not a brand new enterprise. So I would say, and really reinforce the notion of start with best practices, and then consider what are the elements, what are the critical indicators of learning-centred programming to make sense of that. The articles have got some insight to that. And if that's too broad at the moment to be thinking, well, what it strives to change is this notion of a lecture-based course that's lecture mostly, with maybe 2 minutes or 5 minutes of questions at the end, with maybe a mid-term exam and a final exam. And that being the mechanism, that would be called a teaching-centred program or content-centred. That mechanism as the way of demonstrating learning has been inadequate. We need to find innovative ways of engaging students in active learning, and we need to think of ways in which we can have assessment that's not just a bolt-on thing at the end and regurgitation of what they've absorbed. Because probably, like a lot of us, we've taken an exam on a Friday, and let's say we got 80%, we knew we could take that same exam on a Tuesday without studying, following Tuesday and might get 50%. So the retention of that absorption, which we had probably profited from as we went through these programs, it was a lecture-based course. We have to think about different ways, exciting new ways of teaching and learning. And there are many, as I mentioned on the board, whether that be through case-based learning or team-based learning, or simply ways of engaging students in different ways, whether it be in large classes or small classes. So I purposefully answered you in a way to try to not come across that it's this, because we've got a lot of best practices going on. Now, there might be some learning today, what are the different ways in which learning-centred education and curriculum can be construed, but to start with best practices and then to build slowly. And small steps has got to be, because you can imagine colleagues in your departments and your units who are still in that very traditional mode. And so, to break out from the lecture, to have some maybe student interaction every 20 minutes or something, would be quite a revelation. and would be quite hard for them because it'd be threatening. They're quite used to being talking and not allowing the students to have the interaction in that way. But the more that we give students opportunities to take ownership of their own learning, that's part of the tenets of learning-centred education. Yes, please.
I'm working in an area where a lot of the learning doesn't take place in the classroom. It takes place in the practice environment, and that's quite difficult to bring this to, because it's very situational, and the clinical domain is very much about what the work that has to be done rather than about the students. And I wonder if you could just speak about how you see this being extended into that sort of environment.
Well, first of all, the collaboration with the practice environment and professional setting at the university are really critical. Because from a learning-centred curriculum, if it's responsive, high-quality, exciting program, we can't do this in isolation in the university. That would be really quite arrogant. But where we can embrace the key people that we're working with, like the people in the practical setting, they've got an insight, they've got things, and of course then we start to build those partnerships. So I agree that from the students' point of view, they see massive amounts of learning in the practice settings where they go out, depending on the disciplines. So to hold on to that, to capture that, and to align courses with those practicum settings more closely, and to have the practice setting aligned with the program level learning outcomes, just like the individual courses, is a way to show a much greater integration with those. So the idea of sort of saying, how much practice can we afford to build into this program? Let's have a discussion around that. Have we got too little? Have we got too much? And now, once we can say, well, you know, we can only afford 20% or 10% or 25% or 30%. Now, how can we make that 25% way more closely connected with the courses? So that, yes, students go out and they learn, but the learning outcomes are integrated and then progressively build onto each other. So it's this notion of learning communities with the staff and our colleagues in these settings being part and parcel of the broader programme, so that they see what we do there and that we see what they do there, and we work together in that kind of collaboration. And that can only enhance the quality of the programme, for sure. Yes?
Would you have been interested in the curriculum for this faculty certificate program over the past year?
The involvement, yes. Well, in the very first year, there were 12 hand-picked people with a view to, if this is going to be built, I want to get as much feedback as possible from these folks. So they were highly selected people to come through them. It was more of a professional development emphasis than a scholarship of teaching and learning emphasis in its first year in 1998 because of that. 1999, the second year, it moved to the scholarship of teaching and learning, because what we realised was professional development was not enough in a research-intensive university like we did. And the scholarship of teaching and learning, it emerged in the literature through Ernest Boyer in the 90s and that. So the timing was absolutely perfect, and it gave a currency to teaching and learning that never had before. So no, this is not about professional development. This is not a teaching tips program. This is about the research on teaching and learning. This is about the scholarship of teaching and learning. And so we had to manoeuvre the program to sort of say, well, what does that mean, and how does it differ from professional development? And what is the evidence for learning that faculty who go on the program have got to demonstrate that we walk the walk and talk the talk? Whereas in traditional professional development programs, people went on an experience, they thought they learned an awful lot, but they walked out the door with fresh air, only things that they could probably translate. So from the institution's perspective, they didn't know what they walked out with because they couldn't relate to that. By turning the evidence for learning into a portfolio, all of a sudden now we're getting people saying, you know what, I've done an investigation on our program, on our 3-year program, and here's the research questions, here's the literature that supports it, here's the data, here were the conclusions, and here were the ramifications for change. And I'm going to try and submit that to, whether it be a newsletter, to a peer-reviewed journal, or I'm going to try and submit it as an abstract to a conference. So they become leaders in the Faculty of Dentistry, Faculty of Pharmaceutical Sciences, and that's just one. Another one is a teaching dossier, where I had to articulate the philosophy statement, the evidence of teaching and these sorts, and a whole range of different learning experiences here. So it manoeuvred in ways that we're saying, you know what, if we want our programs to move in these directions, then the program's got to provide that kind of element. Now, they don't come on these, it's like a lecture-based course. most of these assignments are done outside of the meetings. The meetings are really just an opportunity to get people together, to talk about where they are in their progress, to learn key elements from research and literature that we share with them. But it's mostly a self-directed program. The implications being that when they go back to their programs and they've got class sizes of 150 or 300 students or 50 graduate students or 20 graduate students, that they're thinking, rather than it be a lecture-based course, I'll get my students, they've got their poster presentation. They're going to have to go out. I'll give them an opportunity where they can collect data and present it as part of a mini research forum in this course. I've got 150 students in this class. I can get them into teams of 5 and 4, and they're going to do research teams and collaborations and interview and all this. So it was a way of translating their own experience into the practice of the curriculum. The other ways it changed is that it was largely UBC faculty, and it got more and more popular as we presented at conferences and articles that came out. And we had interest from faculty from across Canada and educational developers and then internationally. People saying, we want to do something like this at our institution. If we come onto this program, could we do it with a view of building the program at our own place? We then go and do our own. We said, sure, yeah, that's great, because the program learns, it's rich for it. And not only that, you go out, you're another part of our dissemination. So we're happy, even though your program will look different to ours. So it became more national, it became more international. We needed to be more flexible. So we started, we met once a week. 10 faculties on campus trying to coordinate the timetable was nearly impossible. But an attendance rate of probably 95% every time for a week, amazing. But we wanted to go more flexible because we thought it was progressive. We wanted to draw in more national and international people, and we wanted to use the web CT and the learning technologies more in a way to investigate it as well as people experience it and critique it. So we moved to a mixed mode program where now people only meet once a month, and they do web CT, they work in teams, and they develop their portfolio on site. So it's very rooted in practice. So to come back to your question, here's an example of a program where we situate it in practice. That's where we see the learning. So we don't see the learning for scholarship for teaching and learning in a place solely. I mean, yeah, for 10% of the time they do, but 90% is actually geared around a reflection on practice. So they get assessed. They get assessed through the portfolio, through external review, as well as internal review of the program. So again, we try to not cop out. We try to mirror assessment practices that they would do with their students. Again, a rejection of the traditional staff development where nobody knew whether you were really high or really low. So the evidence of learning that they're producing there is assessed with a set criteria as well. And that they realise that, and to build that they contribute to that as well.
I found that my class is a lot of student activity based, it's very little lecturing. And I find the first time I did it, I found the students went into shock because they've been used to lecturing and all of a sudden, so what I did, next time around, what I did, I said, early lectures, I showed them the common learning and explained why the structure of the class was the way it was. And the shock was a lot less and the resistance was a lot less. And I found that easy to transition.
Well, that's a great idea because you're then educating students on your own understanding of pedagogy, which then makes sense to them. And what I like about that is all too frequently, faculty don't share with the students their philosophy of teaching and learning and how they're playing that out in practice. And that's why we often get the student resistance or saying, wow, what's going on? Is this on the exam? Is this on the final exam? And if it's on the final exam, the rules are easy to learn. We sit, we absorb, we spit out, we pass the exam and move on. All of a sudden you're changing the rules and I need to know, how do I invest my time and energy as a student to succeed and do well in this? And I hope that you're not going to sell me down the river and then give me this exam at the end of it when we've been doing all this other. So it's a nice way what you've done to share with them your understanding of that and then how the course mirrors those principles.
Please, sorry, you're showing the exact right thing about lectures, right? Because still in my department, 90% of the courses are lecturing, final examples. I think it's the case in the university, 90%.
Yeah. It's
this the case worldwide? 95%?
No, it's high, but it's changing. It's changing because people are saying this. How effective is a lecture? And what is it? And what is it? But how effective in terms of learning is the lecture? And what is the evidence that we know? And the existing body of evidence is, well, I lecture every week for 13 weeks. They pass an exam, and I can see what they've done on the exam. But nobody said, well, what about a week later when they haven't been ahead of time like that?
So what are the numbers? I mean, am I wrong? It's not 95% in the world.
No.
What would be the figure?
There's going to be such a disparity across different places. And of course, remember, it's a climate of change. So as institutions, as regions move towards learning-centered education in small steps, then the lecture is becoming more and more challenging. Now, I'm not trying to say there's no place for the lecture, and the lecture's a bad guy and all this. What I'm saying is that students learn in very different ways, and we need to be attuning to different ways that they do learn. And there's a well-known saying that if our students don't learn the way we teach them, we need to teach the way they learn. So the research around learning styles and inclusivity sort of illustrates the fact that different students will learn in different ways. And often it's a modification of the lecture.
Well, I'm thinking about my colleague's point about the way we have been taught. And if every time there's a seminar like this, everybody's shooting on the lecture, then implicitly or not explicitly, everybody is aggressed because that's almost the only way we know how to do, how to teach. So somehow we should start by telling the staff, okay, you know how to do a lecture, let's start from there.
Yes.
Instead of killing it.
Yes, yeah, and you make a good point. I don't mean to come across as I'm using this as an extreme view. It's highly problematic from what we know from the range of learners and styles we've got. But for many, it's a questioning of the lecture. And it's sort of saying, how can we modify the lecture? And then what are alternative things that are out there? And that's no different from a scholarly point of view, what we ask in our discipline. We don't just do a line of research and say that's that. We're always curious. Who's doing what, where and how? And what are they doing? And how can I sort of use a bit of that and borrow a bit? Whereas if the lecture is a lecture and it's a static format, then there's no scholarship going on there. Having said that, it asks us some uncomfortable questions. And I think the material today, globally, it asks us some difficult questions. And I can point to many best practices that I've seen out there but they are really few and far between. But what we see is a climate and a culture of change where there's an openness to say, well what's an alternative to lecture? You mean, I've never thought of a program as the sort of thing that helps students learn, they've got evidence of learning. What a way, so that's all part of that reflective process to move it forward. Well, folks, I know some of you have got teaching to do. I just wanted to say thanks for your contributions, thanks for your participation. It's great to see you all there. I know that there's a yellow sheet there for you to do, and there are some drinks and snacks, I believe, outside as well. I think you worked extremely hard today, so thanks ever so much for coming along, and I hope it was useful for you. I am around for a little while if you wanted to ask any questions and stuff, and I hope to keep in touch and hear from you. Thanks very much.